Okay, so let us review last class. So last class we discussed the British Empire and how it ultimately triumphed over its main rivals, who were the French, the Spanish, and the Dutch, because of three major powers, okay? The first is the Bank of England. What made the Bank of England so important is that it could absorb foreign capital, okay, from all around the world. So at first it absorbed capital from the Dutch Republic, but then if you were a French aristocrat, if you were the Catholic Church, if you were the Habsburgs, you could all move your capital to England where it would be safe because it would be protected by the law, okay? The idea of property rights. And when Britain became an empire, this was important because local elites in China, in India, in Southeast Asia would help the British because they were incentivized to do so. They could help the British steal from these places and then move capital, their wealth, to England or one of the British colonies for safekeeping, okay? So that's a source of English power. Second is the idea of soft power, right? So we are in school learning English because we want to go and study in the West. That's soft power, right? So Shakespeare, the BBC, Oxbridge are all components of British soft power, which still rules the world today. And the third, of course, is the British Navy, which controls sea lanes and therefore controls all trade, okay? So for the longest time, for 100 years, Britain was able to maintain a global empire, which really was the first global empire because it spanned the entire world. But there were three problems or three limitations to the British Empire, okay? So the first major limitations. The first major limitation is that Britain had an ethnicity, it had a race. It was the white people, the Anglo-Saxons. And so even though Britain was ruling over a vast global empire, it was very much racist. It saw itself as superior to everyone else, and that limited its capacity to work with local elites. Okay? So in other words, eventually India rebelled to establish its independence, and eventually Britain lost its overseas empire. A classic example, of course, is 2016 Brexit, when the English people decided that we no longer wanted to be part of Europe. Okay? And so even though Britain is an empire, its people are very provincial. Okay? They see themselves as better, and they see themselves as separate from everyone else. I've met English people who've told me, like, English people cannot learn a foreign language. People speak English very well, and that's it. They can't learn French, they can't learn Spanish, they refuse to learn Chinese. And they told me it's because their brains are different, okay? Their brains are hardwired to speak English really well, and that's it. All right, so that's just the British attitude. Second problem is the idea of currency or wealth standard. And the idea here is that, okay, yes, you're stealing wealth from other places, but what is wealth, okay? And for the longest time, people understood wealth as gold. The problem with this is that there's a limitation, or there's a limit to the amount of gold in the world, and therefore there's a limit to how many people can participate in this game and how much money they can win in the end. Okay, so it's really a game only for the elite. That's the second major limitation. Okay, and the third problem for Britain is that it's really a small island with very few people and very limited resources. And therefore, it was really not sustainable for Britain to control the entire world. There's a limitation to its reach. And ultimately, other powers in Europe would arise to challenge British hegemony, including Russia, including Germany. Ultimately, the power that would overthrow the British Empire to create its own empire is, of course, America. And what America would do that's very important is resolve all three of these limitations to create a world game in which we all play today. Okay? So Britain basically birthed this game, but there were limitations to how far this game could spread. America will then take the concept of this game and spread it all around the world until it conquered the entire world, okay? So how did it do so? All right, so let's go over America. Well, first of all, America is not a small island. It is a continental fortress. In fact, it controls the entire Western Hemisphere. And we know that the Western Hemisphere is very, very wealthy, okay? So America is not just the country of America, it's really the Western Hemisphere. And as such, it has unlimited population, it has unlimited resources, it has unlimited land, okay? So this resolves the issue of resources, okay? Second problem, the currency. Well, what America would do that would revolutionize the world is make the US dollar the standard of wealth in the world. And because the US dollar is just a concept, it's just an idea, everyone can now play this game, and wealth can now be infinite, okay? Right, that makes sense, right? Before, gold was what everyone was playing for, but there's a limit to gold. But with US dollars, anyone and everyone in the world can now play, okay? So I'll talk about how the US dollar became the center of wealth in the world. Now, the ethnicity is another problem, okay? And so what America did that was very clever is tell the world we are not an ethnicity, okay? We're not a land. What we really are is a game, all right? So the idea is that America became a nation game. All right? So, so this is pretty easy to understand, okay? So I'm gonna explain this first, and then I'm gonna explain how the US dollar came to dominate the world. Okay? All right. All right, so for the longest time, we had problems deciding what a game or a nation ought to be, okay? So traditionally, nations have been ruled politically through the monarchy, okay? An oligarchy, a democracy, or a theocracy, okay? So there are others, but these are the four major ones. A monarchy is very simple. A king is in charge. Everyone just obeys the king. Oligarchy is where the nobility are in charge. Another name for oligarchy is the aristocracy, okay? And that's basically Rome. A democracy is where the people make all the decisions. And so what happens is that if a decision is to be made, people get together and they give speeches. Whoever gives the best speech gets the most votes. And then that decision is implemented, okay? And of course, the classic example of democracy is Athens. Okay? And then you have a theocracy, which is to say that the priests are in charge, and the priests represent the will of God. Okay? And of course, theocracy, the classic example is a Catholic Europe. This is medieval Europe when the Catholic Church was in charge. All right? But starting with the Enlightenment,